Chapter 2, in which Todd and Audrey Pratchett are presented in our story. As you would have probably guessed by now, I, the author of this story, shall now introduce you to two ordinary children named Todd and Audrey Pratchett, along with their family. Their family consisted of their father, their mother, and their four grandparents. Grandpa Jack and Grandma Eileen were the father and mother of Mr. Pratchett. Grandpa David and Grandma Eliza were the father and mother of Mrs. Pratchett. They lived together in a detached house in a suburban neighborhood in the midst of the city of Codono. The house is large enough for so many people, and life was good for them all. It consisted of a living room, a foyer with an indoor water closet, a dining room, a kitchen, a utility room, a patio, a garage, a garden in the backyard, a shed behind the garage, a single bathroom, a sewing room, a bedroom for the children, and a master bedroom for the parents. For the four grandparents, they sleep on twin beds in the living room because they were so old and tired. Even though the grandparents were seldom allowed to get out of bed and head outside, after 20 years, they never head far from the house. It may turn out that they lost the will to do so. Grandpa Jack and Grandma Eileen on the left bed, Grandpa David and Grandma Eliza on the right. Mr. Pratchett was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in a delivery service at the bakery near Cherry Street, where he goes anywhere all day long, delivering baked goods like bread and pies to the city folk, riding his red hockey bicycle. Working at an 8-hour shift pays him moderately. And Mr. Pratchett, no matter how hard he worked, and no matter how fast he delivered goods, it was exhausting just for the price of making enough to buy one half the things that so large a family needed. Just hard for the grandparents. They often eat oatmeal slop for supper. Always, the Pratchetts have something to do. Todd and Audrey have something to do most of all. They usually do that in their playhouse at their backyard. What keeps them from getting bored was their imagination. Walking from school in the afternoon, Todd and Audrey would head to the playhouse between the patio and the garden after their homework was finished for that special occasion, for they were as clever as children could possibly get in times like these. Each time, they would find things that would be useful in the house. They would even use the gardening tools from the shed with permission, just so as long as they bring them back. For example, Todd would use a cardboard tube as a telescope while pretending to be a pirate with the playhouse as his ship, Audrey as his first mate, and their stuffed animals as their crew. Another time, they would pretend to be king and queen, with their stuffed animals as their peasants. Sometimes they're accompanied by the ringing of silver bells that were tied to the branches of the backyard tree. If they were not entertained enough, in the evenings, after they had finished their dinner, while their grandparents feast on oatmeal slop, they always went into the room of their four grandparents to listen to their stories, and then afterwards to say good night and sleep by 10. Every one of these old people are surprising to reach 90. They were shriveled like raisins and ancient like skeletons, and throughout the day, until Todd and Audrey Pratchett went back home from school, they lay huddled in their beds, dozing their time away with nothing to do, except read the papers or listen to the cathedral radio. But as soon as Todd and Audrey came back home, then all four of them would sit up, and their old wrinkled faces would light up with smiles. And the talking would begin afterwards, expressing their great care to them. They're the only bright thing in their lives in times like these, and their evening visits were something that they looked forward to all day long. Often, Mr. and Mrs. Pratchett, the children's mother and father, would come in as well, and stand by the door listening to the stories that the old people told. And thus, in 30 minutes' time, every night, this room would become a happy place. For the Pratchetts, they always knew that there was nothing special about the city they live in. Everybody knew that it was a deeply ordinary place. For 200 years, no astonishing thing ever happened there, and the 300,000 occupants that populate the city were just regular people. They were the people you'd soon expect in a city like Kodono to see anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Only thoughts of precision and order. They even didn't question the order of things. So the days passed, one very much like the other. Ah, but dear readers, I've yet to tell you about the one thing that Todd and Audrey, even their family, didn't know in this city, and it was this. In Kodono, there was a princess from another world, with pink hair, cat ears, and a tail. They haven't met her yet. Only fate will let them know. It was nearly sunset, and everything is uneventful at the Pratchett household. Inside the kitchen, Mrs. Pratchett is cooking oatmeal slop for the grandparents while listening to the cathedral radio. In the living room, Todd was doing homework while his sister watches. The 4 old grandparents are listening to their nighttime drama on the radio. Returning from the delivery service, Mr. Pratchett, Todd and Audrey's father, store his bike in the gardening shed before heading inside and into the living room, where he placed his hat on the wall rack. He was tall and very thin, with short brown hair and matching eyes, in his late 40s, dressed in his white shirt, olive green sweater vest, broad blue ascot, beige trousers, and dark shoes. "Evening, all," he said with a smile. "Evening," Grandpa Jack greets his son with a nod. "Hi, Dad," Todd and Audrey said to their father with a greeting. Mr. Pratchett went out to the living room and into the kitchen, where his wife is preparing the oatmeal. "So good to see you back from work, love," Mrs. Pratchett said. "Speaking of food, don't suppose there's anything else for the grandparents to eat?" Her husband shrugs. "Me neither," she went on. "Nothing's better for them except oatmeal slop." She was a kind woman of 39, with blonde hair that reached her neck and blue eyes, dressed in her pale green poplin dress, tied with a white apron and white pumps. She was always caring for all 4 of the grandparents as much as their carefree children. She pours the oatmeal into 4 bowls as Mr. Pratchett heads back to the living room, moving towards the desk where Todd and Audrey were working, smiling. "Hey, children," Mrs. Pratchett said. "I've got something I think you two will like. I got this on my way home." From his coat pocket, he takes out a folded piece of paper. Todd grabbed it and opened it. Then he smiles eagerly. He was hoping for good news after all. It was a flyer, advertising the fair that celebrates the city's bicentennial. On the advertisement, there was a picture of a marvelous rigid airship hovering over a fairground. Attached to the back of the gondola, the huge blue, white, and orange flag fluttering from a pole. The huge slogan on the top read, "Come fly around the city on board the airship Providence." The bottom read, "At Kodono's bicentennial celebration, Sunday, June 9th. "What do you think?" Mr. Pratchett asked. "Impressed?" Todd laughed. "I can tell this is going to be the best summer ever." "Is there something you would like to show us, Todd?" Todd handed the flyer to him and looked at it. It didn't take long for him to become impressed, too. "A dirigible?" he asked, and turned to Mr. Pratchett. "I never thought I would hear something essential as a dirigible in our city this summer, while there's a celebration happening." "It was the finest and safest that's ever built, Dad," Mr. Pratchett said. "Is it really?" Grandma Liza muttered. "In times such as these, some fools would take to the air, while the sane ones prefer to keep their feet on solid ground, thank you very much." "It makes me quite ill to think of flying," said Grandma Eileen. "Why should you be thinking about flying when you always remain at home?" Grandpa David said. "What about this dirigible?" Grandpa Jack asked. "From Empire City, the dirigible Providence will make the transatlantic crossing and land at the Kodono Fairground down by the beach. On the day of the celebration, the captain will take 2 or 3 exclusive people to go flying with him and his crew around our city, free of charge," Mr. Pratchett explained. "You mean we'll fly on a blimp?" Audrey asked. If the captain decides, yes, Mr. Pratchett said, smiling. If not, we'll be no different from the other people who didn't get chosen. As soon as Mrs. Pratchett came into the living room with a tray full of 4 bowls of oatmeal slop, Mr. Pratchett tells her about the celebration that's going to be held on the fairground. But who will take them? She asked. It's too far away. It's by the seaside. I'll take them, love, he said. You leave everything to me, while you take care of the others. Why not me? Grandpa Jack asked. Not with those legs, you're not, Grandma Eileen snapped. Well, that's what you think. As soon as I get my strength back, I'll get out of this house and be with my grandchildren. But Mr. Pratchett said, Dad, in all the years you've been saying that, I've yet to see you set 1 foot outside. Grandpa Jack sulks. Maybe if outside wasn't so hot. Mr. Pratchett said to the children, You go play in your room. I'll let you know if dinner's ready. You both got school tomorrow. When summer starts, then I'll take you both to the fairground. But what about Grandpa? Todd asked. Your mother will stay and keep him and the others company. When the fair's over, we'll come back to see him. When night came, when everyone is asleep, Todd and Audrey sneaked down to the living room and talked to Grandpa Jack. They were all whispering. Grandpa, we've been thinking about you, Todd said. Do you really think you're going to come with us? Audrey asked. I was looking forward to it, but only at the right opportunity, Grandpa Jack said. He was the eldest of the 4 grandparents. He was 90 1/2, and that is just as old as any person in Cadorno can be. Like all extremely old people there, he was fragile and weak. Throughout the day, he spoke very little, but when Todd and Audrey were in the room, he seemed in some miraculous way to grow quite young again. All his fatigue died away from him, and he became as eager and excited as a young boy. As long as you're still children, anything is possible, he said. Let fate decide what the next step will be. But what about grown-ups? Todd asked, staring at his grandfather. You think grown-ups should feel like a kid again? I'm afraid not, because once they grow into maturity, it's inevitable. They'll probably end up with jobs to pay bills and responsibilities, or end up in the street. So many work they have to do. There's no time to do childhood things like toys or go to the playground or anything. They're just too old for them. Then we should never grow up. Me too, Audrey said. Impossible, Grandpa Jack said. Everyone had to grow out of childhood. Everyone does. And there's one thing you know about grown-ups acting like kids. They usually end up in the hospital or in prison. That's how society truly works. Foolish to think otherwise. Then there is no time to waste, is there? Todd asked. Quite so. We have to get on with things, right? We each have responsibilities, you and I. Seeing that you'll turn 13 this fall, you'll be old enough to get your head down in the clouds and start keeping both feet on the ground, right? I know. And start having thoughts of precision and order. Grandpa Jack nodded. Exactly, son. Enjoy having thoughts of imagination while you can, because starting on September, you won't have very much of it left. Even people will say it's for your own good. No astonishing thing happened here, and it never will. But what if it did? Todd asked. Are you willing to believe? Maybe, Grandpa Jack said. After all, given from this day and age, the world still had so much mystery. The lust for something stranger leads down many paths, but it isn't immediately welcomed with open arms. Todd slowly nodded, and he and Audrey head back upstairs and into bed. Do you think we'll find something unusual? Audrey asked. Hope so for the summer, sis, Todd said. Would it be amazing if we did find something so unheard of? What happened the next day after school is an almost improbable story, but I may read it to you, dear readers, in the chapters that follow.